Good afternoon. My former professor at Ahmedabad, Professor Javju, former Governor Dr. Y.V. Reddy, Dr. Ramashastri, my colleague Mr. Gandhi, other colleagues from the regional office, including Mr. Das, the regional director, distinguished bankers, and dear friends. Let me first congratulate IDRBT on the fantastic range of work that they're doing and keeping us abreast of all the developments in technology, as well as providing a coordinating function for the banking system in terms of what the banking system ought to know, what it should react to, and how it should keep pace with the tremendous developments that are happening. So, after congratulating IDRBT, let me also congratulate the banking system itself, the winners of the IDRBT Banking Technology Excellence Awards this year. The awards were instituted in 2001, so they've been given for a long time, but it also reflects the amount of innovation and action that has been taken by the banking system in this decade and a half. What I want to talk about today in the brief time that I have is really about some of the applications of the kind of technology that we've seen, and especially in the area of payment systems where the advances are tremendous, and in fact it's something that we keep using lightly, but I think is a reality in the payment system. We're seeing a revolution happening before our eyes. Now, payment systems are in many ways the plumbing of the financial system. And as with plumbing at home, so long as there's no leakage or clogging, we are completely unaware of its functioning. But when it backs up, it can become catastrophic very quickly, and you really know that the system is having deep problems. So it's important for us that the payment system function effectively and seamlessly. And increasingly, it's important for us because the payment system is the means by which we need and aim to include much of the unincluded or excluded population. Now, as the regulator of the payment and settlement system in the country, our job is to make sure that the necessary regulatory framework is developed, and we try and do it through a consultative process. And we try and ensure that in doing so, we cater to all the different segments of society that we have. Obviously, we want to ensure that there's easy accessibility of the system, that the system is interoperable, and importantly, as Mr. Gandhi mentioned, that it's safe and secure, something which cannot be easily taken for granted in these days of increasingly innovative cyber crimes. We also want to encourage a variety of payment channels, not only because they cater to diverse needs, but because they add resilience. If you have diversity in payment channels, one channel being attacked or one channel having specific problems, doesn't damage the entire system if we can rely on other channels to take their place at that time. Now, as again Mr. Gandhi mentioned, banks have been the traditional gateway to payment services, but with the fast pace of technological change, we can no longer take that for granted. That may indeed change as some of these fintech companies, as well as non-bank entities such as NBFCs, provide innovative new solutions and products which will force banks to reflect and rethink some of their strategies. Now, thus far, the strategy for banks, the strategy choice, has really been, do we compete or do we collaborate, right? And there, I think, of course, one cannot compete effectively if one hasn't been investing in technology and the associated personnel over time. And it's not too late to pick up, but it's extremely important that appropriate investments go in this area, because clearly this is going to be key to the future. At the same time, if banks decide to outsource some of this strength and attempt to collaborate without building these capabilities, there's a very real danger that they may be left with crumbs from the client while their partner takes the whole client cake. In fact, from RBI's perspective, we really don't mind whether it's collaboration or competition. What we do mind is when concerns about doing either lead to paralysis. As, for example, we had when, for a long period, mobile companies and banks were not willing to work together using mobile technology for fear that one would capture the other's clients. We're glad that with the licensing of payment banks, that fear, that logjam has been broken, and a number of alliances between banks and mobile companies are now underway. And I'm sure that a whole new set of entities will start forming alliances to deliver payment systems effectively. Now, let me very quickly describe how we would like to see the payment system evolving. Again, because we don't know the future, and the future can be very, very different from what we imagine, one has to be fairly broad in how one describes what one can expect, because the future will almost surely surprise us in terms of the solutions that will emerge. Now, what we do want is that our regulations governing payment systems have to be devised in such a way that they're ownership neutral, institution neutral, and technology neutral, so that we can encourage the most effective outcomes to, efficient and effective outcomes to emerge. Also, and this is something that we are adapting to, we have to learn to adapt, and we are adapting, we have to be more open to experimentation at the early stage of a product or at the early stage of release of a method of service. I think you will see this openness to experimentation in the soon-to-be released peer-to-peer lending regulations. But the idea is, at early stages, we have to be open. But as the product grows and becomes more important, and becomes systemically important, we have to be more conscious of the risk to stability, and at that point make sure that we have all angles covered, that we understand the product fully, and the regulations are in place to prevent excessive risk. Now, this is an approach that has been developing in the RBI. It has a novel name in some other places. It's called the sandbox approach. Let the kids play in the sandbox, let them do anything so long as they don't do anything too dangerous. And it's only when they start emerging out of the sandbox that you pay significantly more attention. We don't want to completely ignore what's happening in the sandbox. There are a whole lot of places where we can help, but at the same time, we want to make sure that there's enough scope for experimentation so that we develop the best technologies. Second, we prefer that payment platforms offer broader access rather than narrower access. So, we would like entities and especially critical channels in the payment function to be publicly or widely owned rather than very narrowly owned and monopolies emerging. Third, we would like, and one example of this where it's publicly or broadly owned is the Aadhaar bridge, which different people can actually use. Instead of that being owned by a narrow entity, it is much more broadly accessible. Third, we would like the payment mechanism to be cheap and scalable so that it's suited to our economy, where ticket sizes are small, but volumes are enormous. And for that, we need this cheapness and scalability. And of course, an additional factor allowing for profitability here would be if the systems are interoperable. And that's why, again and again, we go back to insisting that they be interoperable or at least able to talk to each other. Fourth, and this is the point Mr. Gandhi made, we need systems that offer security, even to the unsophisticated user. And what's important here is you cannot take the excuse this user did not follow the 15 different rules I put down for them to use the system. You have to cater to the unsophisticated user in unsophisticated ways of using the system. And what has to happen is the security has to be built around that less than sophisticated user, rather than assuming that they know everything, they will follow everything, and they'll do all that you demand of them. This requires a greater effort on the part of institutions. For example, greater emphasis on transaction monitoring, on identifying suspicious patterns, and ensuring that you intervene quickly when such suspicious patterns are established. We need this rather than an insistence on increasing levels of care by the average customer or user. And often you want to ask yourself, if this product was operated by my elderly relative, would they be able to operate it in the full fitness of things? If they wouldn't, and if they would be exposed to a lot of risk, then how do I redesign the product so that they can use it? And fifth, of course, in case things go wrong, we need an effective process of consumer redressal that allows speedy and fair resolution of customer complaints. I was talking with our ombudspeople this afternoon, and I was told an increasing source of customer complaints comes from online transactions done by our banks, where transactions get dropped in the middle, and reconciling the fact that the money has gone out of your account but has not actually reached the online platform that you wanted to pay takes a long, long time. And today we don't have effective systems of redressal here. And what we need to ensure is that so long as the customer does his or her bit and adheres to a reasonable level of care, residual risks and residual costs should be absorbed by the operator. And I think with effective use of technology, it is possible to ensure that these risks are limited substantially. Now, very quickly, let me walk through the tremendous developments that have been happening in the system brought by many of you, especially some of the award winners. Clearly, we have various payment products and interfaces now available. We have various forms of cards, mobile banking, ATMs, micro ATMs, prepaid payment instruments, e-wallets, m-wallets, and so on. The list keeps increasing every day. We have various channels through which payments can be made: the National Electronic Funds Transfer System, NEFT, Real-Time Gross Settlement System, Immediate Payment System, Instant Money Transfer System. Again, here the acronyms keep multiplying, but that suggests we have a lot of channels targeted at specific needs. Now, what I'm especially enthused about is the increasing use of mobiles in payments. We have the USSD channel, the *99 hashtag, which attempts to use the ordinary phone. And I'm promised by the end of this month, UPI will come into operation. And I am extremely enthusiastic about the possibilities that UPI would offer, where someone, a villager, who wants to pay a shopkeeper in his village, he just needs to know the shopkeeper's alias, ram@xyzbank.psp, types that into his phone, writes the payment amount, puts in his password, and presses send, and the payment is made, with both getting messages to that effect. This, I believe, is what is possible. This, I believe, will happen at the end of this month in some form, and I'm looking forward to payments becoming so effective that we neither need to visit the bank to take out or deposit money, that we don't need point-of-sale machines, that this can be done in fairly remote villages. You still need connectivity, but fairly remote villages. And if we can do all this, I think we can solve the last mile problem which has plagued us in financial inclusion for decades. Of course, government is also using the payment system very effectively through the Aadhaar payment bridge system, the Aadhaar-enabled payment system, and bulk payments are being done in important ways. We have the National Automated Clearinghouse, which is going to do bulk payments, and we are integrating the electronic clearing service to the NACH. We have, in this process, tried to emphasize security, two-factor authentication, for example, is now common across the system, including in some ATMs. Of course, there have been complaints about two-factor authentication. A number of merchants say, well, you're asking for the second factor. By the time the second factor is put in, the transaction drops and we'll lose a sale. Well, certainly we are ready to work with merchants to try and ensure there are other ways of doing it which meet our and the customer's need for security. But we also want to emphasize that security itself enhances the number of transactions that are done. When the customer feels safe inputting their credit card number because they know they still have the second factor of authentication and their credit card cannot be misused, they feel more confident in using the credit card on the online system, and that increases sales. So don't forget that security also adds to sales, even while security adds to transaction costs and sometimes potentially to drop sales. We need both, and we need to figure out how we do both. In terms of coming developments, we have the Bharat bill payment system, which has been put in place to address the needs of the large bill payment market, to provide the convenience of anytime, anywhere, any bill being paid across the system by users. So many of you will have the ability now to do that as the Bharat bill payment system rolls out. For the small enterprise, we have the trade receivable discounting system, which should be a game changer for MSMEs, that when an MSME has a receivable against a large private entity, which the private entity will pay after 120 days, the MSME gets that receivable accepted by the entity and then sells it on the exchange. And by selling it on the exchange, the small business gets its money immediately. The buyer of the bill gets a claim on the large reputed corporation, and the large reputed corporation gets that 120 days of credit, which it was getting anyway. The point is, everybody can benefit here, and it will increase the flow of credit to these small firms. So with these changes, I think the questions that confront many of you are the traditional questions that confront both the huge opportunities that come from changes as well as the challenges that emanate from changes. Quite simply, the first question that comes is the question that we have been facing as the Reserve Bank. Is our vision broad enough? Is our strategy broad enough to take into account all the new technologies that are coming in? Do we have adequate human resources to project the requirements and implement what we need to implement? And this is where, after a study of what we had available, we moved to creating an IT subsidiary, which Mr. Gandhi talked about. Second, adopting technology is more than simply automation. If you just automate, often you don't get the serious gains that come from using technology. We also need to work around and re-engineer business processes so that they take full advantage of the technology. Don't just put band-aids using technology. Technology has to be thought through. A conscious evaluation of the customer experience, the security issues, the breakdowns, all that. If you take a long-term view of all that, you can make the best use of technology. Certainly that's something that has confronted us. Now, increasingly, one of the things we have to be wary of is, despite all this talk about technology capturing payments and so on, the rate of adoption of electronic payments is still somewhat slower than we would like. Cash usage has increased in the last few months for a variety of reasons, which we are trying to understand better. But we haven't seen cash wiped out by technology as yet. Forget electronic cash that Mr. Gandhi was talking about. Now, why is this? One possible explanation is that electronic transactions formalize the transactions, while a lot of transactions can remain informal with cash. And so long as there is some amount of tax avoidance through the informal cash-based transactions, you have to overcome the disincentive to pay cash for them to migrate to the electronic means. Now, I think this is a matter of time, because as time goes on, there are fewer and fewer spaces in the financial system that can be hidden from the tax authorities. Increasingly, almost every space will become open and clear to the tax authorities, and therefore, the reluctance to do transactions for fear it may attract the attention of the tax authorities, I think, will diminish, while the benefits of doing these formal transactions will increase. If I know that you've made thus and such amounts in sales, I have more of an incentive to give credit because there's a formal record of the sales that you have made. So I have no doubt that over time, merchants will increasingly push for electronic payments, but there's no harm in giving them more incentives even today. So merchants that show an increase in electronic transactions could be rewarded, for example, with some tax credits from the tax authorities. Similarly, private participants, individuals who use electronic means, could each get a number which is entered into a lottery. Every transaction you do could be entered in a big lottery, and every month there could be a big prize given out to those who win the lottery. A few lucky customers would be rewarded, but more important, it incentivizes them to ask for the transaction being done through formal electronic means. Now, that said, it may not be that tax is the single most important issue. It could also be the safety and security, as well as the worries about using new technology, especially when overall security is unknown. And this is why I think we have to emphasize the security aspect also, that customers should have absolutely no hesitation using electronic technology, digital technology to make payments, knowing that they are always protected, either directly or indirectly, because there's a maximum loss that the institution will impose on them if things go wrong. Now, this is why I think it's extremely important that we all focus on the technology aspects as we go, on the security aspects as we go forward, and certainly the work that IDRBT is doing in this regard, including getting together details of cyber crimes across the system and sharing the details and sharing potential solutions. RBI's information technology subsidiary is also going to support this activity, including by providing some support to the system, as well as conducting cyber supervision for the system. To conclude, we are very much in the midst of a payments revolution. There is more that can be done. There is more to enhance the volume of transactions, more to enhance the sense of confidence that customers have in the system, more to enhance the customer redressal process to make customers feel that the system is working for them. But I have every confidence that the people in this room and the people outside will rise to the challenge that this poses and ensure that the wonderful innovations for which you're being rewarded essentially solve the problems that confront us today. Thank you very much.